This evening, we are happy, and I am personally over the moon, to host Zita Cobb from Fogo Island, Newfoundland, who is our guest speaker for the Public Matters Speaker Series, now in its 5th year. The Public Matters Speaker Series marks an ongoing creative partnership between Museum London and Western's Faculty of Arts and Humanities, more particularly the Public Humanities and the School for Advanced Studies in the Arts and Humanities, which is one of our undergraduate programs. This evening, we are also very grateful to have Paul Kennedy from CBC Ideas, who has been teaching an upper year course at SASA, examining ideas in the humanities and introducing students to many of the dear friends he has made on and off the air. In the 5 years since beginning our Visiting Speaker Series, on the broad topic of leadership in arts and culture, we have welcomed a multitude of citizens like yourselves from across the city for the main event, our public lecture. But we also felt it important to stage smaller events for greater impact for the stakeholders and leaders in public life here. In this case, bringing on new partnerships each year that we hope will sustain Public Matters as a key calendar event in London and beyond. As an example of a partnership event, we hosted a workshop at the Grand Theatre last year. And that focused on theatre in our city and area as it relates to theatre in Canada. In our 5-year history then, we had guest speakers from TIFF and the Banff Centre, the latter of which is a national, if not world, leader in the types of arts residencies we now see in Fogo Island. And that, for me, signals the winds of change. Last year, we had the privilege of hosting the artistic director of English Theatre for the National Arts Centre, Gillian Kiley, the incomparable Gillian Kiley. Also from Newfoundland, I might add, and who this month is next up directing the Colony of Unrequited Dreams at our own Grand Theatre. Adapted for the stage by Robert Chafe from Wayne Johnson's novel of the same name, The Colony of Unrequited Dreams is a fictionalized retelling of a soon-to-be premier Joey Smallwood, leading Newfoundland into Canada in 1949, which, told one way, could also be the backdrop of the story of Fogo Island in the last century. But the real story of Fogo Island in the last century is a story of hope and resilience, exemplified by the work of Zita's neighbors and family members 50-odd years ago. Standing here, I tell you, as someone from a remote place on an island on the northeast coast of Canada, not dissimilar to Fogo Island, with similar concerns, I am so deeply moved by Zita Cobb's example, as it is a story of many people from Fogo Island. I cannot begin to tell you how much it has inspired me, and indeed the affirmation it has given me for the role of arts in public life, and even more particularly, the role of arts in the resilience of rural communities, and which, based as it is in community, asset-based community development, I think it could also be applicable to urban communities all the same. So to be clear, our partnership for this speaker series represents a shared goal to find ways that the university and the community can work together for the greater good. Knowing that bringing us all together in the same room, at the same time, can lead to the type of change and the type of programs and partnerships of tomorrow that can have a far-reaching impact. Bringing us full circle, The organizers of Public Matters have found a great deal of inspiration in one of our nation's greatest legacies of community-university partnerships, which began in the mid-'60s between the people of Fogo Island, the National Film Board, and Memorial University. And that's where participatory filmmaking methods, now known the world over as the Fogo process, allowed Fogo Islanders to embrace what they knew from centuries of island life as preparation for a rapidly changing modern world. One of many lessons here is that we cannot overstate the power of universities and communities working together, just as we begin in this lecture theater together. In that spirit, at the museum, we invite you to become a Museum London supporter. It is so important. In that way, you will hear about upcoming exhibitions and talks not unlike Public Matters. Supporters of the museum, of course, receive a discount at the Muse Shop and rental upstairs, in addition to free admission to most Ontario art galleries, which I think this year, as Canada turns 150, is quite special. It is an absolute honor for the museum, for the university, to host Zita Cobb and Paul Kennedy, who I would like to invite now to come to the podium and invite our friend from Fogo.
Can I begin by asking a question? And I guess I'm now teaching at Western, so could everyone who's been to Fogo raise their arm? Not many. 8%. That's the pollster talking here. I think I have to describe Fogo Island, at least my experiences of Fogo Island, before I do anything, because I don't think you can understand Zita Cobb unless you understand Fogo Island. I actually went to Fogo first time, got to be about 12, 13, 14 years ago. I was working on a series, a major series I was doing for Ideas, and it's probably the piece I'm going to be most proud of in my entire career, an 8-part series called Learning from the Oceans. And this was in the old days when public funding was more available to the CBC. I was basically given 3 years. I had other tasks, of course, during the 3 years, but in those 3 years I was given the enormous privilege of traveling around the coastline of this country. And Canada has the longest coastline in the entire world. We're the only country with 3 oceans as borders. And from the get-go, I decided I needed to go to Fogo. And I decided that when I met somebody who was involved in the Fogo Island Cooperative. I met her in Halifax. But Fogo I'd never even heard of before that. Let me tell you what it is. It's an island off of an island. It's the biggest island off of a very big island called Newfoundland. It's magical. It is one of the 4 corners of the earth. And if you don't believe me, go to the Flat Earth Society and they will give you whatever you need to know about that. One of the 4 corners of the earth is in Fogo Island. And when I went there, which was 10, 12 years ago, I have to say it was sort of before Zeta, or BC we can say. I guess that's more Canadian to say BC, before Cobb. But it was an amazing place. I went there on the ferry. The ferry's not completely dependable. There's a new ferry, and it's not dependable. I love watching the news to find out when the new ferry is going down. So I know there's something consistent about Fogo. The new ferry doesn't always work. Anyway, I was on the ferry. I went across, and my first stop was a place I'd actually made reservations. And it was, I think it's called the Quiet Cannon Motel. There's something very Fogo-esque about a quiet cannon. It makes a lot of noise, but it doesn't kill anybody. And it was an amazing place. My room in the Quiet Cannon Motel was pretty rudimentary, let's say. The windows, Fogo's a beautiful place. It has amazing vistas. The windows were this high, like just above my eye line. And you have to jump up to look out the window. And they weren't very big either. That's pretty well true of Newfoundland. I found that windows, especially windows facing the sea, where most of us CFAs or Upper Canadians or whatever you want to call it, most of us want big windows looking at the sea. In Newfoundland, that's not true, because the sea is, although it's the source of life and the source of income, it's also a very threatening place where Uncle John and maybe even your dad or your brother died. And so you don't always want to look at it. So that might be the reason the window was so small. I checked in, I sort of drove around the island a bit, went back to the motel to crash that night, and woke up the next morning, and the first thing I did, of course, was open the curtains on the window, jumped up. 6 inches of snow had fallen overnight. I was in love with the place and have been in love with it ever since. At that point, as I say, it was BC, before Cobb. I didn't know anything about Zita, but I knew a bit about the Fogo process. And the Fogo process was something that I was interested in putting into this 8-hour series called Learning from the Oceans, because what was done, as Joel said, what was done then by the NFB, by Memorial University of Newfoundland, and by the people of Fogo Island was really miraculous. And that was, I think, they saved the island. The Premier of Newfoundland at the time, Joseph Smallwood, decided that outport communities had to be evacuated because there was no way to keep schools and hospitals and whatever was necessary in tiny little communities. So they all had to be evacuated and moved to other places. So the NFB went to all the communities in Fogo and interviewed all the people in Fogo and asked them what they thought. Do you want to leave? And it was, I don't know if it was unanimous, but it certainly seems like it in anything I've seen from the interviews that I've seen on tape. People said, no, I don't want to leave. And so they went to Tilting, I think, and in Tilting they interviewed everyone. They took all of those interviews and went then to Jobat's Arm and showed the interviews from Tilting to the folks in Jobat's Arm, and then they interviewed everyone in Tilting. Then they moved along to Fogo Central. They went all around the island talking to people who weren't talking to themselves because there wasn't a road. It's not a big island. There was nothing connecting them on land. They were connected by the sea. And when they went to sea, they went out fishing. They didn't talk to other people necessarily from the nearby communities. I mean, Zita told me she didn't really know anyone from Tilting. And she was in Jobat's Arm, and it's like 10 kilometers away, something like that. There was a sort of isolation within the isolation. But there was a common feeling, plainly, because everyone almost unanimously said, no, we don't want to leave Fogo. And so they turned Joe's offer down. They decided they would stay in Fogo. And they built a cooperative, a fish cooperative. They bought the fish plant, the processing plant, and they made a go of it. Not only made a go of it, I mean, these were very hard-headed, canny Newfoundlanders. And they said back then in the 60s, cad's great, but it might not last forever. So we'll get into other fish. And they started fishing lobster, and they started fishing capelin. They diversified the fishery. So a couple decades later, when a Newfoundlander named John Crosby had to go to St. John's, he was Minister of Fisheries for the federal government, he had to go to St. John's and tell hard-headed, soft-hearted fishermen that they had to close that fishery, that there was going to be a referendum on the fish. Probably one of the toughest things that any politician in this country has ever done, to stand up to that crowd and do it. It was tough, but in Fogo, guess what? It wasn't all cod. You can close the cod fishery, they still had other things going. So in the 60s, Fogo was saved by the National Film Board of Canada and Memorial University of Newfoundland, working with the people of Fogo. And I found that tremendously inspirational. That was the story I was doing when I went to Fogo. And I went around and I got the story. I went to the co-op, talked to people already. Everyone told me that story. I was there for only 2 or 3, maybe 4 days on that first trip to Fogo. I think I've been there 5 times since then. And me being a little bit of a journalist, the host of Ideas is not really the kind of guy who chases fire engines and does obituaries or whatever, but I thought, there's something missing in the story. There's something missing. It's all too rosy and soft and furry. I've got to get something a little harder here. And as I was driving towards the ferry, which is on the sort of western side of the island to get back to the mainland, you go by Change Island. You have to go to another island before you get onto the island of Newfoundland. I saw the high school in the center of the island, Fogo High School. I thought, I'll go into the high school. I'll talk to some kids if I can do it. So I went into the high school, went to the front desk, and said, is the principal around? Can I talk to the principal? And I did, and I said, I want to talk to the best and the brightest. I want to talk to your best kids. And I want to find out what they think about Fogo, whether they're going to stay, what's going to happen. And I went to the library and waited, and then 2 kids showed up, and they blew me away. I talked to them about all kinds of things. We covered the map intellectually, and they were amazing. And then after this was the interview, and I'm finding out that, wow, Fogo's probably a good place to go for a high school education because they were getting a well-rounded view of the world. At the end of the interview, I said, okay, so are you going to stay here? And both of them looked at me as though I'd lost my mind. Because I said, no way. We're getting off this island as soon as we can. We're leaving. There's nothing for us here. The internet existed by that point. They had seen a world that was infinitely more exciting and more interesting than anything they could find in Fogo. And they told me that they were leaving. And I ended the little piece of that 8-hour series on Fogo with the population, and I can't remember what it was at the time, but I said, let's make a figure up. The population of Fogo was 6,134. And I said, but the population in a year from now is going to be 6,132 because those 2 kids are leaving, and they probably won't be the only ones. I hadn't thought about that until I think about a year ago. I was going to Fogo again a year or so ago, and I sent Zita email, and I just remembered that, wow, I talked to these 2 kids. That was probably a decade earlier, and they had said they were leaving Fogo, and I never followed up on it. But I thought, I'd love to know where they are. And so I emailed Zita, and I said, do you know where, and it was Amy and Todd? I can't remember their names. I had their last names. I had one of the names wrong, which was also a good journalist here, right? I emailed Zita, and I said, I interviewed Amy somebody and Todd somebody 10 years ago, and they both said they were going to leave the island. Can you tell me where they are now? And Zita said, Amy's still on the island. In fact, she's working for Shorefast. And Todd, well, he's a lawyer in St. John's, but he's Fogo's first lawyer. So we've kept him. So she said 1 for Fogo, half for St. John's, half for Fogo. And that's sort of, I think, tells you about Zita Cobb. She did the same sort of thing. She left Fogo to get a university education. There are no universities in Fogo. She wanted to go to St. John's. It's a great story about her telling her dad that she was going to go to St. John's. And her dad said that she wasn't going to go to St. John's because he'd been to St. John's. And I love the line. It's like, St. John's has nothing but sailors and whores. And I don't want my daughter to be one of them. So she ended up going to Carleton. I think she wanted to study English literature. I'm teaching now a class in the humanities at Western where I'm trying to teach the class, tell the students they're doing the right thing, that they're in the right disciplines. Yes, lawyers might get a job right away. Yes, doctors and engineers and even business people might get jobs right away. But the folks who are doing work in the humanities, who are asking real questions, are the ones who are going to be valuable. So Zita wanted to get a job, I think, in English literature. She went and got a job in accounting, again, to quote her father, because even when there's no money, somebody's got to count it. And that's what she did. She counted money for a while, and then at one point decided it was time to cash all that in and go back to Fogo. And she's done that. And I think she's saved the island. So, Zita Cobb.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, Joel. You've got a really good setup for me. This is my first time in London, Who says it's cold in Newfoundland? So I am going, first I have to find the clicker. I always remember the line in This Hour is 22 Minutes. She's always looking for the Jeesley clicker. Anyway, we got to get the clicker to work. So, well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here on Hot on the Hills of Gillian Kiley, who is remarkable. And you must go see Colony of Unrequited Dreams. You must. I'm going to talk about, it's going to seem like I'm talking about Fogo Island, but really I'm talking about us. I'm going to talk about all of us, about how we live together on this planet that at the moment seems to be on fire. I think we are living through a crisis of belonging. That's why we called it Belonging to the World, because it's very tricky to belong. It's very slippery. And I think lots of places, lots of people have fallen out of the story of the world. And I think some of us even fall out of our own stories. And I think that crisis of belonging is tied to a crisis of value, of valuation, how we value things. And what is the relationship between the inherent value of something and its economic value? Because they seem to have gone off in odd directions. And it also kind of seems that we actually have two economies. We have the real economy that people work in, that's tied to the physical world. And then we have the speculative or kind of gaming money economy, which seems to be eating the other economy. And so in this kind of pickle we find ourselves in together, I'm going to talk about it from the point of view or from a lens of Fogo Island. But really, it could be anywhere. And I'm going to talk about something, a notion of the sacred. And something being sacred, not necessarily, in fact, not at all, something that is religious or spiritual, but something sacred, meaning something that has emerged out of a specific or unique set of circumstances that, if injured or destroyed, can't easily be replaced. And I think if we can come back to some notion of the sacred, maybe that'll help us tackle this whole notion of value. And if we can tackle that, then we can maybe solve some of the belonging challenges. My old boss used to say, this was in the tech, I worked in technology, I was a finance person in my career. And anyway, this really amazing fellow named Joseph Strauss, who was one of the founders of a company called JDS Uniphase that I worked with for many years, every morning he would come to work and he'd say, the most important thing is to keep the most important thing the most important thing. And I think that's what we're having difficulty with, all of us together. So I want to say every time, that's Brimstone Head, by the way, that is one of the four corners, that is the corner, one of the four. It's in the community of Fogo, and I got to get this thing working. Okay, here we go. I always love this, from Stanislav Lech, yes. So in this predicament we find ourselves in, we are all victims and we are all perpetrators. Like these snowflakes. Every time I say Fogo Island, I expect you to fill in the name of a place that means something to you. I'd like to think that every one of you get up tomorrow morning and think, oh my God, what am I going to do today for Fogo Island? That would be lovely. But you better have a community that means something to you, because if not, you'll never, ever be able to make meaning. By the way, how many Newfoundlanders are here? Yay! Okay. No Fogo Islanders, perchance. Great. By the way, every photograph, unless I say so, is from Fogo Island. And one lovely thing about having designers and artists in residence is they take really great photographs. These are lichens, Fogo Island lichens. You know, lichens are when a fungus and an algae get together because they need each other. And they're really great indicators of air quality. Anyway, every time I say Fogo Island, you're going to fill in the name of a community that means something to you. It's a journey without maps, how to belong to the world. Only the U.S. military would have a phrase for this, that it's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And if you don't like it, it's fast, and it's getting faster, 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 and faster. We live in a time of wicked problems. There's no moral statement in that. Something is considered a wicked problem when it's so complex, it's hard. It's like trying to pick the pepper out of the salt. And you think you're solving a problem, but perhaps you're just making things worse. Who said that? Oscar Wilde, I think. But it's hard to know if you're working on a symptom or if you're actually working on a root cause. And that's just the way it is. There's an ideology called reductionism that is alive and well. And I can tell you, my career was in the business world. It's especially alive and well in the business world. And it can be a very destructive ideology. It's a useful way of working. For example, if you go into your doctor and your knee hurts, well, your doctor needs to get up close and reductionist about your knee to understand what's going on. But if she's going to prescribe you something for your knee and fails to stand back and look at all of you, she's probably going to kill you. And what's going on with your knee won't matter. And so I think a lot of the problems we've caused ourselves in the world is because there's a lot of reductionist, siloed thinking going on. Now, I have to tell you, I am not a new agey person. And when I even say the next thing, I feel slightly uncomfortable. But there's an alternative to that, and that is whole thinking, which is very hard to talk about. It's like trying to talk about love. It just gets away from you. I'm a huge fan of E.F. Schumacher. When I was in university in the mid-'70s or so, his book, Small is Beautiful, came out, which I know everybody thinks is kind of trite. And I don't think we've done enough with his legacy. He had some great sentences. One of them, well, he has some great ideas. One of his sentences was, every human being should get up in the morning, look at the world, and try to see it as whole, which is hard work. And it forces you to think about the other before you decide what you're going to do after breakfast. I don't want to dwell on this too much, but of course Klaus Schwab is the founder of the World Economic Forum, and this is from a little book that he published last year. The speed and breadth of this revolution is forcing us to rethink how countries develop, how organizations create value, and even what it means to be human. So that's kind of where we are. Gil Chin Lim was I think an urban planner, an academic. He was at the University of Michigan, I think. A South Korean man. Much of his writing never got translated yet into English. He coined this phrase, humanistic globalization, which I think is on my next slide. Of course, globalization. We're not going to go backwards. That ship has sailed. But he called for, instead of Klaus Schwab's fourth revolution, he called for a revolution in values, which is the very thing we have to figure out. Yes, and here's his calling for, how do we create a global network of intensely local places? Because you don't want London to be like Fogo Island. I don't want Fogo Island to be like London. Otherwise, it wouldn't be so exciting to come here. Of course, the most successful communities from here on in, I think, are going to be the ones that are really good at relationship thinking. Islands have a bit of an advantage in this, because if you're on a little island, you're always thinking about your relationship to the main. Even like, how do things move back and forth? How do people move back and forth? You're very aware of the boundaries. We started an initiative on Fogo Island a few years ago to get rid of plastic bags. Well, it's dead easy. It was like, okay, well, don't bring them across on the ferry. But I think there's a lot to learn from islands, and I think it was, and I don't, maybe it's not too much to say that maybe a small island could be a good proxy for a small planet. And I always love that phrase from Tim Robinson, the geographer, who said that a small island offers the promise of a comprehensible totality. Like, you could know something in its entirety. I'm 58 years old. I feel like I've spent my whole life trying to understand Fogo Island, and I'm not there yet. Okay, I think we're back to, it doesn't want to go again. I'm going to go over here. I'm not negotiating with that clicker. But now if I go over there, I can't see how long my arm is. Okay, there we go. I can do this. More Schumacher. Nature and culture are the two great garments of human life. Of course they are. I've never met a human being that disagrees with that. I'm going to move the microphone. I meet lots of people that don't act as if it were true. And then, of course, business and technology are the two great tools that can and should serve them. So all we have to do is to flip it around so we change the relationship from what is master and what is servant. And I think we are on the path to doing that. I think that's the spirit of that has arrived. We just need to do some more implementation. So this idea of sacred capital, I first came across it in the writing of a fellow named Charles Eisenstein, who wrote a book called Sacred Economics, which is very new agey. I didn't actually read the whole thing. Like the whole middle part was too much for me. But this idea about sacred capital I got from him, and these things are sacred. If they are injured, they can't easily be replaced, and they have inherent intrinsic value. And then, of course, there's money, which is important, but not sacred. And of all the things we have a shortage of in the world, it's not a shortage of money. It turns out we humans are pretty darn good at making money. It's not always where we need it to be, when we need it to be there. Much of the money that's been made in the world has been made at the expense of sacred capital. Now, I want to say I am a capitalist. I'm a business person. I just think we haven't been always doing it right. And we just have to start doing it right, and we have to find that right relationship between money and sacred capital. One of the things about money that is so, I think we don't understand our relationship with money, actually, we human beings, not individually and not collectively. One of its qualities is that it's generic. And so it's kind of a proxy for anything, including power. We get satisfied with turnips. Like, we will not hoard turnips forever. We'll hoard money. Like, we will not hoard anything else. I remember in the Lord of the Rings, remember the good guy gets the ring at the end and he's supposed to throw it in the fire? Even the good guy doesn't want to throw it in the fire. So I know I'm in lots of university people here. Somebody needs to do more research on our relationship, our human relationship with money. Okay, now we're going to go to Fogo Island, which is far away from far away, as Paul said. People who are not from Newfoundland have a tendency to believe that Newfoundland is in the north. It's not really that far north. Fogo Island is at 49 degrees north, and London, I looked it up this morning, is about 43. I think the reason people think the Newfoundland is north is because of art and the power of art. Great artists like Rockwell Kent, who painted all made these beautiful prints of icebergs and ice. And so I grew up on Fogo Island. I'm an 8th generation Fogo Islander. And we faced into the Atlantic, and what was behind us, we honestly didn't really know. I don't want to say we didn't care, we just didn't know. And I actually feel like I've lived in 3 centuries because, and I'm not a vampire. Until I was 10, I really lived in the 19th, maybe the 18th century. On Fogo Island, we had no running water, no electricity. My parents couldn't read and write. When I was 10, what Paul described, and I'll talk about, the worst of the 20th century of the industrialized age came down on top of us in the form of this factory fishing. And my career was in fiber optics in enabling the internet and the digital revolution. So that was the 21st century. I'm sure there'll be a few more centuries under my keel before I get done, because the centuries are moving by much more quickly now. I met Chris Hadfield once at a talk, and he said, Newfoundland is very beautiful from outer space. It was very beautiful from up close as well. And so this is Fogo Island. And the thing about Fogo Island is it's a community of communities, 10 little communities that, as Paul described, up until really in the early 70s, we didn't know each other. And there wasn't a road. You see the road now. That really wasn't there. And we didn't have cars. Everybody had a boat. And the way we were inshore fishing people. We fished for cod, traditionally, 350 years of it. We fished in family units. And we dried the fish. We were salt fish people and sold it at the end of the summer, traded it in a truck system, what was so-called, with a merchant. And I grew up in Joe Bat's Arm. I don't trust the clicker, but you know it's up there at the top. And as Paul said, I'd never been to Tilting until I was 13, and it's 5 kilometers away. And the other thing, and I kind of dwell on this kind of not knowing each other, because it mattered when the time came for us to figure out a path together. In those old days, it really didn't matter that you didn't know someone from Deep Bay. And it probably didn't matter a whole lot if you were in London that you didn't know people in New York. I mean, it is just, the world has changed. And those kinds of interconnected relationship things were not as important then. I mean, now they're essential. And so that high school that Paul described is in the center of the island, opened in 1973, and I was the first crop of students that went to that school. And that was the first time in our 400 years on Fogo Island that Protestants and Catholics went to the same school. What I take from that is, when we human beings put our minds to changing and improving, we do it really quickly. We held a grudge against each other for 350 of our 400 years. And now nobody remembers what it was all about. Okay, so to give you a sense of the vernacular architecture, this is Little Fogo Islands, which is an archipelago of some 80 little islands off the coast of Fogo Island, in case you're not feeling you're far enough away with the first one. But I want to show you this because this, I read this quote from Faulkner the other day, which I thought was so beautiful, that the past is not dead. In fact, the past isn't even in the past. And it matters. And so our past, we built buildings like this, that's called the fishing stage, where that man is coming up. A stage is a staging area between, it belongs neither to the land nor the sea. It's a staging area in between. And it's where we would land the fish, gut it, lay it flat, head off, salt it, and then spend the summer drying it. And so this, to give you a sense of the sacred capital of Fogo Island, lots of puffins. I love showing this picture on Fogo Island because nobody ever sees the whale. They always see, oh, what a great picture of Round Head. Because Round Head is the most important headland of navigation coming back from the fishing grounds. Caribou that the government sent in 1967, 8 caribou to the island. They came by helicopter. In the same instant, I saw my first helicopter and my first caribou. And now we have hundreds and hundreds, and we hunt them. There's a quota for about 30 a year. And I didn't want you thinking that Newfoundlanders are all soft and fuzzy. The provincial flower of Newfoundland is a carnivorous plant, a pitcher plant. And this is what it looks like at home now. The pack ice is down. So the thing about Fogo Island that makes it specific, I mean, I think it's special, but special is not nearly as important as specific. And what makes it specific is that it's on the northeast coast, so it's in the Labrador Current. And the Labrador Current is a very cold, fast-moving current that comes from Greenland. And as Pete Decker says, every year half of Greenland breaks off and comes down on top of us. And so that's what this is. And you could wake up in the morning and every bay and every harbor is filled up with ice. And the tide and the wind changes and it's all gone. But with it come the seals. So we used to be sealing people. So the sealers of Newfoundland were people from the northeast coast. And that is no more. And then after that, the icebergs come. And this building, so you'll see some of the contemporary architecture that we've been working and creating over the last few years. Todd Saunders, the architect, spent a very long time with this building, which is in Deep Bay. And that's a fishing stage. We don't know how old this is. It's at least 250 years old. Turns out that salt preserves the wood. Okay, now it's not going to go on this one. Oh, here we go. I grew up like this, which is to say I grew up feral. And you can be sure that those kids know when the tide's coming in. Otherwise, they'd be drowned. And many, 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 many people drowned. I mean, in my family, everybody's family. Actually, that's one thing we have in common with London. I read this morning that 200 people drowned on the river here. In a ferry accident, like a long time ago, but still, I'm sure that's not forgotten. This is Tilting, which is an Irish community. I'll talk a little bit about settlement. So in 1492, everybody knows Columbus crossed over the ocean and all of that. Well, in 1497, there was a lovely Italian fellow named Giovanni Caboto, John Cabot, sailing for England, because everybody has to work. looking for India, he found Newfoundland. And he apparently wrote a letter back to the king that said, "Sire, the fish are so plenty, they stay the progress of my ships." I always wondered how that letter got back. He must have brought it back himself. He had found one of the biggest populations of fish on the planet, the North Atlantic cod. Not to be confused with its inferior cousins like ling cod, which are actually not cod at all, or even Icelandic cod, which is a different species. And so began centuries of people coming over, mainly from England and Ireland, who settled in Newfoundland to fish for. It's the most beautiful fish in the world. It has more protein than any other fish. And you can always tell it from its barbel. This is Little Fogo Island. And this is the way we fish. This photograph, I think, is from Placentia Bay, but it gives you a sense of, we were inshore fishing people. We never went more than 5 miles offshore. Brilliant coastal navigators, not so good in deep water. And these men are probably brothers or father and sons. They would have made their own boats, made their own gear, built their own houses, because where else were you going to get it? And this is the way I grew up, and this happened. It took 30 years from the moment the first one of these things was built in Scotland until the cod were brought to the brink of ecological extinction. 30 years. Like I said, when we put our minds to something, we're really good at getting it done. You could, at a time that we ostensibly had a 12-mile limit, you could see these things if you went on the hill behind our house, pressing that close into the shores. So you can imagine that in 1968, if you were in the boardroom of a fishing company, lots of cause for celebration because the peak of landings, revenues are up. For any business people that are here, we need to find a new language. We've got to stop calling income and revenue things that are the extraction of natural resources. We need a word that has embedded in it caution somehow. Next slide, not a great surprise. In 1968, the biggest drop in the biomass of the cod. And it was 1992 that John Crosby, who was the Minister of Fishery that Paul talks about, closed the fishery altogether. But in those in-between years, 68 and 92, I mean, they were painful years. Newfoundlanders adapted to a midshore fishery, Fogo Islanders did as well, and went to other species. But it was in 92 that scientists finally, and we found a political will to say, it's got to stop. So the happy news, and I sometimes forget to tell the happy news, the cod are coming back, and they're coming back in incredible quantities. Now we're going to talk about Joey Smallwood, because, you know, we're going to. He was the ultimate reductionist. And when you go see the play, you'll see that he got elected on the backs of the votes of people from Outport, Newfoundland. And he was no sooner elected than he enacted the Resettlement Act and tried to clear everybody out, because he fundamentally didn't believe that the fishery was a real way to make a living. He thought we should all be working in some factory in, I don't know, where are you going to find a factory in Newfoundland? Oh, let's build one. In any event, this photograph is also from Placentia Bay. Fogo Islanders did not want to resettle at a time that dozens and dozens and dozens of communities all around the coast moved. I had one uncle who left Fogo Island, and he went from being self-employed, fishing, to being employed. He got a job as a security guard at the mill in Grand Falls, to being unemployed. So self-employed, employed, unemployed, all within 3 years. And there were no more jobs in Grand Falls. So he eventually came home and became self-employed again. Anyway, Fogo Islanders didn't want to go. However, it wasn't that easy. I have always believed this, that ability determines what we can do. Motivation determines what we will do. Fogo Islanders have no shortage of ability and no shortage of motivation to stay home, except for the teenagers. I wanted to leave too after grade 11. But, you know, we come back. I don't tell many Newfoundland jokes. I would tell you this one. How can you tell the Newfoundlander in heaven? She's the one moaning and groaning. She wants to go home. But what challenged us at the time of the Resettlement Act was attitude. We had a dreadful attitude toward collaborating because we didn't know each other, we didn't trust each other, and we didn't know how to come together to find a path forward. And I think if you had put a bunch of Fogo Islanders in a room at that time and said, what do you want to do? I think we would have used our brains too much. And our brains really don't do much except they evaluate risk. We know all the mistrust lives in our brains. I don't think we would have ever figured it out. But a miracle happened. And the miracle that happened to us happened in the form of art, in the form of the Fogo process, in the form of filmmaking, because Memorial University at the time had an extension service. What the heck ever happened to all of our extension services? I sort of figured, well, I guess we just don't think we need the rural places, so we don't need the extension services or something. Anyway, we had one then, and this man, who's since passed away in the little picture, is Don Snowden, and he invited the National Film Board of Canada, this man, Colin Lowe, who only passed away last year, to come to Fogo Island to basically see how they could be helpful to this. And 27 beautiful little films were made that are all online now that changed everything. It actually helped us see what we could not see before. And the reason was, because it was, in the way it was done, it was art, it invoked all of our ways of knowing. It sort of short-circuited our brains and invoked all of our humanity, our whole body. I remember seeing these films at the school, in Joe Bat's Arm, at the little school, and this man on the screen, and he was from Deep Bay. And I always thought that people in Deep Bay had funny ears. Wow, he can't possibly be from Deep Bay. Anyway, in the way he spoke, you could feel his nervousness, and he had this very different accent from us. But every part of the fiber of everybody in that room responded to that man as if he was a human being. And from that whole process of talking and filming and sharing the stories, people came together and formed. You've got to imagine this: no running water, no electricity, no education, and now no fish. They formed something called a Fogo Island Improvement Committee, which I thought, that's pretty optimistic. And they took over the fish plant that had been basically abandoned by the departing merchant. I mean, the merchant left, there was no fish to buy, apparently. And they made a little start. That fish plant became several fish plants because we've diversified species. It's still owned by a cooperative. It is the only reason we are still on Fogo Island today. And I think we need more of this, more community ownership of businesses, community ownership of our own assets. And I think a co-op is one way to do that. I mean, it's a tangly way to run a business because it's always very confusing. People get mixed up about what it means to be a fisherman or a shareholder or a board member or whatever. But never mind, it's our own tangle. And there's nobody in Florida deciding to close the fish plants on Fogo Island. So anyway, we held on, and much of what we're doing today is really just copied from what they did then. Working with different things, but the way of working is very similar. If you're having a bad day, watch this film, The Children of Fogo Island. It'll do two things. It'll remind you what play is, and it'll make you feel slightly ashamed that we have deprived modern children of play, or forgotten what it is. So Fogo Islanders adapted, as Paul said. The fleet on Fogo Island looks much like this now. Cod are coming back. We're in the middle of trying to figure out what that means. There's been last week, we found out the shrimp stocks are down they've fallen by 3/4. So it's a quarter of what they thought it was. So, there's a big crisis looming for next year. But in a way, the fishery's been in crisis for 400 years in some ways. This is what it looks like to go fishing for crab on the northeast coast of Newfoundland, because the pack ice is down. To even go fishing, they have to get through this. So at the time, let's go back to 1968, my father, who was Lambert, couldn't make the transition to other species and go to the midshore because he couldn't read and write. So he was basically put out of the fishery because of technological innovation. And he always said this to us: I don't know what happened. Because we always wondered, why would anybody in their right minds fish 24 hours a day without a break? I mean, surely to God, you could figure out the fish can't keep up with that. And we never thought they were evil, the people on those boats. but we never understood like what the heck it was. And so, Paul, I wanted to study English, but I didn't. I studied business, sorry. And I studied business because I wanted to understand what ideology was driving the conduct of those boats. And when I was in first year university, I had an epiphany this one afternoon in a class, an economics class actually, and this was, I had actually seen a cauliflower for the first time in my life shortly before, after I got to Ottawa, and I realized that Fogo Island was one little tiny floret on a cauliflower. So a cauliflower is a fractal, right? It's just a pattern that repeats and repeats. All of these florets are held together by the connective tissue called the stem. The stem has two jobs. It's supposed to hold us all together, and it's supposed to bring nutrition. And what hit me was, in 1968, the stem, which is our business systems, our governance systems, our distribution systems, it became too self-serving. And it forgot its basic job was to bring nutrition to the floret. So it deprived these communities of what they needed to be healthy. And so I go through life seeing the world as a cauliflower. So now I'm on a different floret. I'm in London today, but we are connected. And I think that's a really important way to think about our economic systems and our financial systems and how we can run them better to help the florets stay healthy. I remember reading a piece from a man, probably somewhere in southern Ontario, who was talking about productivity increases. He was a farmer. He said, I've always been pressed for productivity increases, and I finally figured out, I don't know why I'm at this. He said, because I have never benefited from any of these productivity increases. I don't know where the benefit's going, but I don't get it. And so I went home in 2006. That's a long story about why going home, but I was finished with my career. I had more money than I needed for a lifetime, and I thought, well, what you're going to do, you're going to go home. And with my brothers, we set up a foundation. This is a registered charity of Canada, and the idea is we want to do something for home. And I'm not that interested in charity. Not that it's not important, please be charitable. But I've never met a person that wants to be the recipient of charity, and it's not sustainable. Eventually Bill Gates' money is going to run out. Mine's going to run out a lot sooner. So what I was super interested in, though, is business. And I think every single person in the world is a business person. You don't need to have a Hugo Boss suit. And it's not that complicated to be a business person. And so we thought we need to put another leg on the economy to complement the fishery, which is the most important leg. And we need to do it in a way that fortifies and strengthens the fabric of the culture of the place. So you didn't have to be all that smart to figure out that Newfoundlanders and Fogo Islanders are deeply predisposed to hospitality. And we had the quiet cannon in, but it didn't seem enough. And so we thought, I've been around the world in many places and seen these exceptionally beautiful properties. And a great hotel or inn is a mirror for the place, right? It should strengthen and reflect and capture, and it's a place to put what you know. So we thought, we're going to do that. And we wanted to do it in a way that was just like the co-op was owned by the community. We used a slightly different model, but we did it as a set of social businesses that are owned by the charity and effectively owned by the community. So we don't forget Schumacher. And we learned all about, and I'm still learning all about, this is the most remarkable thing, asset-based community development. Because you can imagine in a small place or even a big place, when things get tough, it's very easy to become discouraged. The weather is bad, the young people are all gone, the fish are in trouble, ferry's not working again, all of this. And so ABCD takes you through a set of questions. What do we have? What do we know? What do we love? What do we miss? And what can we do about it? And as soon as you pivot into what can we do about it, well then, it's just a question of what you're going to do. Farley Mowat, may he rest in peace, said, Outport, Newfoundland is one of the few places in the world that the wheel has no utility. So I think he was talking about this kind of a landscape. So these are the things that we decided to do as the foundation. We started with art because art saved us the first time around. I have no doubt that art is the right answer to every problem. The thing about business, and I used to be pretty good at it, one of the things, because I think we teach a lot of wrong things in business school, one of the things you get taught is, oh, be decisive. That's such a crock. Because what tends to happen is you're halfway down the road to the wrong answer when the right answer is trying to emerge back here. And not that art has every answer, but it does allow you to live in the questions long enough to find a better path. And so we started something called Fogo Island Arts, which is a residency-based venue for contemporary artists. We also have a gallery and we publish. We started that in 2009. We built a little inn. I'll share you that story as well. We have a micro-lending fund that's modeled after the Grameen Bank. We figured if the guy can win the Nobel Prize for micro-lending, didn't think we could do better than that. And we have a whole bunch of initiatives that fall under this umbrella of ocean ethic. We started a little fish company, which was never our plan, but in any event, led by my brother Tony, we bring Fogo Island cod, they're caught one by one, to restaurants in Ontario mostly, in Toronto, maybe somebody in London has. We need a fine restaurant in London that's going to serve Fogo Island cod, so we've got to find one. By doing that, we're helping bring nutrition to the florets, right? And a Fogo Island shop which is a furniture shop. I want to say about this distribution problem. When we were working in the early days of what's called wave division multiplexing, which was the big thing that allowed the internet to be rolled out, we thought, man, this is going to be great. Like, we are working on the agora. You know, you could be living in London and you could buy a quilt from me on Fogo Island and we'll be directed and, you know, connected directly and there's no one in between us. We really never anticipated these platform monopolies that have come to dominate commerce in the digital world. And back to Stanislav, like, we're all victims and we're all perpetrators. Every time we order a book from Amazon, we kill a little bookstore somewhere. We take money out of the pockets of writers. And the weird thing about Amazon is it doesn't make any money. Its value is all speculative. It's all in the stock. But we're all a part of it. So, got to go down the road, find a bookstore, buy a book. Okay, we move on. These are the things we steer by. We believe in the intrinsic value of place. Place is not a commodity. And being respectful of all of the ways of knowing, not just the analytical ways of knowing. This man is Frank Lane. He passed away just very recently. He knew more from his experience. He knew more with the hairs on the back of his neck than all of us here tonight could ever know about the gestures of nature and what's more important than that. But engaging with him, you know, I'd come off a career in technology, and it's like, you're not going to send Frank Lane an email and expect a response. So yes, it's engaging. Life is a rhythm of opposites. You know, the duality is in everything. Accepting that is the hardest thing to do. And when you're working in small communities, trying to do community development, things that look like contradictions, you know, they're not really contradictions. It's just a paradox. It's just a paradox. And if you're not, we humans are intrinsically lazy. And someone said to me, yes, because our distant ancestors had to work so hard not to get eaten and to go out and kill something, and, you know, that now in our time, we want to heave off on the couch and have it all easy. If life feels comfortable, that should be a signal to us that we've compromised, that we're not working hard enough at the rhythm of opposites. Community is a basic building block of human life. And I don't mean it's a community because I have a Subaru and you have a Subaru. Community is when we have a shared fate, F-A-T-E, and we know it, and we act like it. There's a lot written, and I'm sure Joel sitting here knows more about this than I do, and you've taught me lots about this. This is from a book which I really enjoyed called Price of Fish, I think it's called. The name of the book's not there. But these are the characteristics. Lots of people study what does community really mean, but community is another one of those words, like sustainability. I try not to say it anymore because it's been so abused it's lost its meaning. Got to see where we are, see where we're going. These are the two words that we test everything by. That it has to have integrity, and integrity means to be consistent and complete, and it has to be original. Original simply means true to its origins. So if you're going to sit around and figure out something to create that's going to be unique in the world, well, it's not going to be unique if you're looking at magazines of what they did over there. But if you let it emerge out of the fabric of the place, of course it's going to be unique and original, because there's only one Fogo Island. So we lived by that. There's something about the digital age, and I think it's a good thing, the digital age. It just is another one of those things we haven't figured out how to regulate or how to behave in. But one thing it does, it's this on-off, this binary thing. It's highly addictive, and it overstimulates our brains, and our brains make us selfish. Like, we really have to get up and walk away from it. And I don't agree with the Amazon people. I think we want to see each other. We want to bump into each other, because that's where our humanity actually flourishes. Art is a way of knowing, and art is a way of belonging. That is a deeply held belief. Businesses must be not just for profit. I would go further and say all businesses need to become social businesses. I think the businesses that don't become social businesses will not endure. We shouldn't allow them to endure. And a social business can be a for-profit or not-for-profit. It just means that a social mandate is an important part of the things they worry about when they wake up in the morning. When we started this 10 years ago, social business was kind of a new sector. And in Canada, we just recently got a registry of social business, and we have a pretty darn good definition. So I'm kind of proud of that. Not that I had anything to do with it, but I'm proud of Canada for having that. And I think these worlds are moving together. When we talk about finance and economics, we always have to, nothing is possible if we can't find the language. Seamus Heaney, if we can find the words, maybe we can find a way. The economists need to find more words. But I love this from Theodore Roszak, that we need to find an economics that aims to educate and elevate, not just measure our low-grade behavior. Yeah. This is the work of Tim Jackson, who is in the UK. He wrote a number of books, but one called Prosperity Without Growth. And I love his pentagon of an economy that works. Of course, he puts politics and society and systems like you would. He also puts art, which that's pretty amazing. He put meaning. What is the point of having an economy where it makes it impossible for people to make meaning? Back to this crisis of belonging. So this is encouraging. Economists are developing a language and modeling for a way that allows us to take the economy back, actually, and to have it serve all the little florets. And of course, we're preoccupied on Fogo Island every day with how do we belong to the world? How do we stitch ourselves into the world in every possible way? We wanted to use architecture and design as a servant of place. If you're a little place, no matter where you are, it's highly unlikely you have access to professional design and architecture. By the way, I was saying, coming in to Paul and to Joel, yesterday, I think the Pritzker Prize was announced, a Spanish firm, 3 people who practiced together. There was a beautiful article in the Globe and Mail about it. The article ended with saying, maybe the tide has turned, because these 3 people practice slowly, collaboratively, and they stayed at home. And so maybe the end of the celebrity architect is upon us. But we've been building little wooden houses on Fogo Island for 400 years. Nobody much noticed. The economy is globalized. You cannot participate in the global economy without access to professional design. How many times you go on vacation somewhere, you come across a traditional craftsperson making something, you buy it because you want to be helpful, you come home and you think, oh, good God, I can't possibly wear this. And so design is not a bad thing, it's just a thing. And it very quickly, it used to be the craftsperson and the designer was one. And when that cell divided and design took off, it very quickly became the handmaiden of business. But let's put it in service of small business, of community. I'll show you. So we started building with these are artist studios, by the way. This is the first one we built. We built everything out of wood. This is made of wood. It has a steel frame. We've never built anything like this before. Building contemporary architecture for our guys took a little bit of learning, but now they're pretty good at it. Yeah, this one was finished in 2009. It's for groups of artists. We just flip through them. This was a funny one. When Todd Saunders started to show early drawings of this in the community, he was a bit worried about this one because it's like a piece of origami. It looks awfully big. It's not that big. Anyway, so in the community, he was asking people, so what do you think of this? It's kind of radical. And one woman said, no, it just looks like an outhouse. I don't know what you're worried about. So, okay. It's a very expensive outhouse. Yeah. There it is, the outhouse. Kate Newby from New Zealand was the first show we did at the gallery. There, the caribou. I always love this picture because you see the ones at the back. I think they're thinking this is the ocean. I think they're thinking like one too many have gone across this ice. Bridge Studio, the only one that's not on the ocean. That's a writer's studio. That's actually Todd Saunders. This is called a squish. It's near tilting. I think we may have placed this one a little too close to the ocean because when the pack ice comes in, last year we had a big piece of ice. I mean, we may lose that studio. Every year that we don't lose it is good. So this image, to give you a sense of the power of design, when Apple launched their iPhone 5, which was, 150 years ago, they used this image. We found out because our websites all crashed. So we thought, well, we're going to write these people a letter. So we wrote a letter saying, we're a little charity off the coast of Newfoundland, could we have a free iPhone? Anyway, we still haven't heard back, so we've sent many letters. Anyway, we're thinking they're having trouble with their mail. So we're going to keep writing letters until we hear back from them. And so artists don't live in those studios. We used to be 6,000 people on Fogo Island. Census that just came out, not that I don't believe that one either, says we're 2,400. I think that's pretty representative of what's gone on around the country in terms of the decline of rural places. Why don't we have a statement in this country that says, I don't know which act we'd put it in, that says, we value rural places. Because if we had such a statement, doesn't mean we have the answer, but at least we'd be saying we have an intention to do something. In any event, artists, because our population has come down so much, we have a lot of houses that need a lot of love. So the foundation restored a number of houses, and artists live in these kinds of houses in the community with everyone else. So this is where it comes together. Architecture has a purpose. It's supposed to be a servant. Great architecture can carry time. It should carry time. And it should be beautiful and functional. So that old building, I think if you saw that in the absence of a new one, I think you'd feel pain for the people whose lives were lived for what? For nothing. It all amount to nothing. This new one, without the old one, would be some young upstart architect's idea of beauty. Who cares? Together, they give meaning to each other. And with them together, you can see time. And I think that's one of the reasons we can't get enough of Italy, for example, because they have this old architecture, we can see time. Like if we go into some of these suburbs that all look the same, they make us sad for two reasons. Number one, it all looks the same, and our human systems crave diversity. And the second is there's an absence of time. So I think we need to demand more of developers and architects and anybody who proposes to put anything in our communities. Then we built a little inn. So we had practiced on these studios. So it's a 29-room inn. We started with a bald rock, like you would. And none of us involved in this project, including Todd Saunders, had ever worked on an inn or anything like that. So it was definitely a lot of hard learning. Picking the site was hard work. We wanted to face into the North Atlantic because that was a sign of respect for the fishing grounds. Todd made a model. I carried this around in my suitcase for a couple of years. Then he made this, renderings, which look so real. Every time somebody walks up the driveway now, I have this image of this rendering in my mind. And then we got busy, and I think in Ontario you probably say you have a sod turning. In Newfoundland we have a rock turning. And then we got at it. It was like a big knitting project. And 3 years from the day that rock got turned over to the day the first guest walked in the door. And the miracle of it all is nobody really got hurt. I mean, very minor injuries. Anyway, we kept at it, and it got done. It's made of wood. It's got a steel frame. It's like a ship. It's 300 feet long and 30 feet wide. People sometimes ask me why 29 rooms seems like such an odd thing. I said, well, first of all, it is an odd number. I love odd numbers because an odd number always leaves room for someone else. Even numbers are very closed. And the real reason was we thought we were going to have 30 rooms, but then we realized there were no linen closets. It's like, but we know a lot about building inns now, should you need any help. This picture is not from Fogo Island. I put it up to simply ask, why do we build things like this? Why do we allow them to be built? And I think there are many parts to the answer. One reason is the obvious one. Our minds over-focus on things we can measure. We can measure return on financial capital. The payback period on this is probably 5 years. What it does in terms of injury to us, to beauty and to joy, we can't measure. Now, the good news is it's only going to last 10 years. It'll be torn down and we get to do it again. Next time, let's build something that is more beautiful and more relevant to the place. I actually have no idea where this is actually. We just got it off the internet. Or as we say on Fogo Island, we got it off the internet. Fogo Island has 7 seasons. When my father first found out, we sort of got tangled up with the outside world. He found out people thought there were 4 seasons. He thought it was the craziest thing he ever heard. So we would count them. We used to get 17, but anyway, we settled on 7. What we are doing with the inn is entering into tourism, which many communities, rural communities, have decided to take on tourism projects as a way of sustaining themselves at home. It can be a dance with the devil if it's not done carefully. I think geotourism, which is was coined by this fellow, Jonathan Tortolo, focuses on guest and host and place and creating dignified experiences for everybody. And I think the most important thing is scale. Got to keep the scale appropriate to the size of the place. And there it is, a little tour around the inn. I'll go faster. How are we doing for time? Oh, I'll go much faster. Okay, this is like the bridge of the ship. We're good? Okay, you have no idea how many slides I have left, Josh. Just kidding. Joel, we're gonna get there. I promised Joel I'd be finished by 8:30. We got 10 more minutes to go. We have a library, which the foundational material for the library came from a man who used to be the president of Memorial University, because the inn got built near his favorite berry picking spot. This is Zin Taylor's show, great Canadian artist who now lives in Brussels. And it was our first show. You know, people never know what to do with themselves at art shows, right? It's except for kids. Kids always know what to do. And Kate Newby's show. We have a cinema. Oh, yeah, this cinema is important. This is a partnership with the National Film Board of Canada. It plays on our very long history with the National Film Board. This is the 50th anniversary of the Fogo process, 2017. If this inn is a ship, this is the prow of the ship, the dining room. So once we had the building figured out, then we started to turn our minds to what furniture and what furnishings. Italy makes lovely furniture, and we had no intention of this when we started out, but we realized we couldn't build this building in this place for these set of reasons and buy furniture from somewhere else. Especially when, as the man on Change Island says, any man can build a house, but not any man can build a boat. And if you can build a boat, you can build anything. And we've been building furniture all the time we've been there. So we realized we have to do it ourselves. That was a big gulp. You can't take a chair that was built in 1850 and make a copy of it and put it in an inn in 2013. First of all, modern bums have higher expectations, but also, if you're going to make copies of things, you're kind of just admitting you have nothing new to say in the world. And back to this challenge of professional design. What we decided to do was invite professional designers, mostly young people, to come to Fogo Island, do residency programs, be put together in a partnership with a local maker, and out of that they imagined all of the pieces. So you might be given a table as a project, or light fixtures, or whatever. And this was a very complicated, highly collaborative process. Quilts was one of the areas we really didn't have a lot of work to do because they're already kind of perfect. We needed to help the quilters source materials because that's not always been easy. Walter Peddle, who's an expert in the traditional furniture of Newfoundland, was an advisor. He used to critique every piece as it was coming to life. We have a church full of pieces that Walter Peddle didn't pass. I remember him one day saying to this one young fellow, he said, "You've been on this island for 3 months, and this is what you came up with." Where do you get your inspiration? IKEA? So, anyway, Walter is, you see how the beauty in this thing? If you can build that, you can build anything. Winston Churchill said that Newfoundlanders are the best small boatsmen in the world. I think that's true. He was one of our great builders. So if you're going to build a boat, first you have to go into the woods and get the wood. You don't go to the lumber store. And so if you were a tree in Newfoundland, you would be smart enough to stay underground as long as possible because it's a windy place. And so when the tree does that, it grows underground, and then it makes the decision to make the turn up. That's the stem of a boat. And that's what this is. So you have to actually dig the tree out of the ground. And one of the chairs in the collection, this is some of the designers. Todd Saunders is third guy from this end. He grew up in Gander, by the way. This was a typical meeting. If you ask Fogo Islanders to come to a meeting, they think, oh, the government's up to something, we're not going. And so if you want to talk, you got to get out. This young woman is from Montreal, Elaine Fortin. She designed what is arguably the kind of rock star in the furniture collection, which is this chair. You'll recognize the shape. It grew out of the ground that way. It's called a punt chair. I think I have a better picture of it. Inaka Hans, basically using turning that we used to use and then cutting it in half. Nick Herder's design, one leg, as you can see, is the offcut of the other. So this spirit of recycling, economy, and use of materials, that's called a puppy table. So this is Elaine's chair, so you get the idea. Of the many things that are broken, of the many relationships that are broken, our relationship with objects is broken because that's the iron grip of consumerism. Consumerism isn't that we love things, it's that we don't love things. That's why they go to the landfill. If you need a new chair or a new whatever in your life, and you buy one that's anonymous and you don't know where the money goes, you have squandered a beautiful opportunity to place yourself in a relationship with somebody else, maybe next door, or maybe they're far away, but at least make sure you know who they are and you know where the money went. And I guarantee you, if that's the case, that object is not going to the landfill. And therefore, that's how we'll get away from the iron grip of consumerism. A little tour around the inn. So these are all the pieces that were made on the island. Bathtubs from a company in Quebec. Wallpaper designed for the inn, because we're Newfoundlanders. If there's a chance to tell a story, we're not going to miss it. And why would we tell somebody else's story on our wallpaper? Hangers was a funny one. We weren't planning on hangers. We had these pegs. Then we thought, well, maybe we should because people probably expect hangers. So then we realized we could not find hangers that met the basic criteria we had, which is if we can make it here, we'll make it here. If not, we'll buy it from Newfoundland. If not, we'll buy it from Canada. If not, we'll buy it from the US or our traditional trading partners. But under no circumstances will we buy from places that don't have basic labor laws and basic environmental protection laws. Well, we couldn't find hangers anyway. So we thought, it's fine, we don't need them. Then we got a reservation for a wedding. So thought, oh no, gowns. So in a big hurry, we worked with a woman who lives in Seattle. She designed the hangers. We made them. They're super beautiful. And I can tell you, as for your wedding gown, they are the world's most expensive hangers. and so for Christmas and birthday presents, and I give this to all my family and friends. You're going to get 2 for your birthday and 1 for Christmas. And I have this theory that everybody needs 12 hangers. 12 per season, 7 seasons. That's Outdoor Furniture by Inaka Hans. So, and there's a book about the furniture of the Fogo Island Inn. So we kind of backed ourselves into a furniture business. This is where we made all the furniture in a falling down building. This was the Society of United Fishermen Hall. really important, iconic buildings around Outport, Newfoundland. Anyway, this is where we made all the furniture. Anyway, in the end, we figured we started a business. We were backed into a business, so we restored the building, which just opened. We have a little innovation center in there now as well. It's the furniture shop. There you go, furniture shop. This is what I want to do when I want to grow up. If I want to grow up, I want to go work there. There's a website. Of course, it's on the Shopify platform. Great Canadian company. This is the packaging for the fish business. There's a nice sized codfish. There you go. There's a film, actually. It's not going to come up there, called Handline Cod. It's doing the festival circuit now. It's an NFB film, if you get a chance to see it. These two useless creatures live at the inn. They're actually utterly useless on land, but one is a Newf and the other is a Landseer. They are great swimmers. They have webbed feet, so if you fall in the water, well, even if you don't fall in, if you just go swimming, they'll drag you back. Newfoundland doesn't have a great reputation for culinary history. However, much has changed in the last 10 years, in part to the leadership of a man named Jeremy Charles, who's based in St. John's, a place called Raymond's. We decided, well, we will cook what there was. And if you look around on Fogo Island, there is a lot to work with. And we have 16 kinds of edible berries that I can name. All of the bounty. These are partridge berries, which are the best berries that have more antioxidants than blueberries. They're wild berries. They're related to the lingonberry. And that is caribou moss, which is a lichen. Caribou sustain themselves entirely on that. We don't have much soil. What we have is highly productive. Last year, one man grew a melon. We're hopeful to get maybe 2 or 3 this year. Actually, that is Jeremy Charles, I just realized, with the hat on, facing the camera. We like to eat outside whenever we can. I'll tell a tiny story about this. When we first opened, that first year, we were serving orange juice in the daybreak basket. And we invited Fogo Islanders to come and stay at the inn because they own it and they needed to know it, and and most of them had worked on it in some way. And so Phyllis, who came to stay at the inn, she said, "Oh, it's all very lovely." She said, "But I don't understand why you're serving that orange juice up there." Because she said, "We have 16 kinds of berries that'd all be happy to be a juice if you just asked it." So we no longer serve orange juice at the Fogo Island Inn. But it's just one of these that we just hadn't thought deeply enough about it. Oops, I got to go back. This is from, I'm really finished now. From Domus, an architecture magazine. And this is about, this whole thing about sustainability. But I love this. An acceptance of precariousness is a prerequisite to permanence. So here's an idea. In my lifetime, we got this labeling on food. I think it started in California. And remember all the big food companies were like, "Oh, it can't be done, it can't be measured, the price of Cheerios is going to go up 50 times, and all this stuff." Anyway, it got done. And now you can look at a box and know what's in it. And you can make the decision for yourself if you're going to have a second bowl of whatever it is. I don't know why we chose tea. Apparently there's nothing in tea. It's like, there's a little bit of salt. So taking this idea, imagine how the world would be entirely different if we had this. Imagine if everything someone proposed to sell us had to carry a simple label that tells us where the money goes. And so we do this for our furniture business and for fish and for any of our businesses. Well, we only have 3 for our 3 businesses. For any business, because we will start more, we will always do this. And I would love to see this get rolled out in the world, but I think it's going to take some big accounting firm, that can actually have that kind of reach. Maybe not the people who messed up the Oscars, but the other ones. I feel really bad for that guy. So all we've done here is to break it down into the constituent types of costs. And so we're a social business. We don't call it profit, but it's the same thing, surplus. We target to make a 15% profit that gets reinvested in the community. If you're a business that wants or needs to make, and some businesses need to make more than that because it takes more than that to actually reward the shareholders because they've had to borrow or they've had to find investors far and wide. But whatever it is, just tell us what it is. That's all. Profit's not a bad thing. Money deserves a return as well. And then we can tell you where the money went geographically. Now, if you're a little place or even a big place, if you get $1, hold on to the dollar. Don't let it leak away. And so this would inform us at the moment of purchase, which is the most powerful moments in our human lives. Okay, I think I'm done. Maybe I have a poem. Yes. Well, this is not the poem. Poem comes after this. We are, each and every one of us, responsible for the ongoing creation of communities. It's everyday work. What matters is what we do. My father used to say, I don't care what you think. I don't care what you feel. I only care what you do, because it's only what you do that makes any difference to anybody else. And the happy news is that everything that everyone does matters a lot. And here's the poem from a New Zealand poet. The art of walking upright is the art of using both feet. One is for holding on, and one is for reaching out. And I think in these times, the funny thing is, you can't hold on unless you reach out. And that's what we've been trying to do. Thank you very much.
Wasn't that wonderful? So we're going to invite Paul Kennedy, to conduct Q&A here, and I'll run the mics. So Paul, if you could start with a question, and then we'll have the audience.
Great. So I've actually asked Zita a number of questions down through the years. I don't know that I've ever asked her, though, what it was that made her successful as a business person. And this is not sort of taking Fogo to the world, but it's sort of taking you to the world. And what was it that made you succeed in a world that was very not Fogo? Like, this is nothing like the place.
That other place.
Yeah. What was it? What would you say was?
I think two things. I grew up by Fogo Island standards, a very small family. We were 7 kids only. And I was one girl and 6 brothers, and the business world I went into was just bigger boys. And I treated them as such, I think. But I think the most important thing was what I learned from my father, who he thought about everything from first principles. He rarely, like even the seasons, like, why would you say there were 4? And I think in business that was really helpful. That I was a finance person. Yeah, I think I could see opportunities because I didn't accept that this was the path without thinking about it in the way my dad would have.
Your dad was amazing. I'd not heard him before, or heard you talk about him before, with that philosophy of life, which sounded almost like existentialism. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's what you are, what you do, not what you say or what you think necessarily.
What you feel.
You have to actually make it real. And Shorefast and what you've done in Fogo is making, like, literally putting foundation under clouds almost, and bringing it really down to earth. Mm-hmm. It's quite amazing.
Yeah, it's doing.
Questions from the audience? Joel's got a microphone. He's at the back, and there's a question at the front here anyway. Down here?
He's moving fast.
Thank you. Such a brilliant talk, thank you. I just wondered more specifically how you made the move from Fogo Island to the university world and then studying economics
there's always
and
a story
finance.
and everything, yes. That when I graduated from high school, I won a scholarship from the Newfoundland government, which, I would never have been able to even think about it. And the scholarship was to go to university in Newfoundland. And as you already told part of the story, Paul, because my father, he was a sealer, and when he went sealing he would take his boat to St. John's and at the waterfront leave his boat, of course, and get onto the big ships. So he'd seen the waterfront of St. John's in those days. And apparently there was a bar there called Fogo a Go-Go. Yeah. Anyway, he didn't want me to go to St. John's. And so I had a brother living in Ottawa, so I thought maybe I could go there. I knew somebody. And I kind of told a lie. Because the only way you could keep the scholarship if you were leaving the province is to study something not offered in Newfoundland. And so I said I was going to study journalism, because Carleton has a journalism school, and one doesn't. So off I go to Ottawa with no intention of studying journalism. And so in the second year, this kind of lie was really not sitting that well with me. So I wrote to the Newfoundland government and said, okay, I'm not going to study journalism, but please can I keep the scholarship? Somewhere in the bowels of the Newfoundland government, this would have gone to some administrative person who could have said no. If they had said no, you think I would have come home? Not so sure. And so that person used their power and looked at, come on, the kids already started school. So that's how I got to go to Ottawa and live with my brother until I couldn't stand him anymore after the fourth day. And yeah, brothers.
If you could raise your arm and Joel can come to you. I don't know if any of you know this. I'm like a wannabe Newfoundlander because I wasn't born there. But I mean, there's something very special about the place, just as she described it. And Memorial is a very special university that way too. I mean, Memorial understood from the get-go that not everyone in Newfoundland could go to high school. And so they made it possible for students to come to Memorial without having the kind of background, the requirements that were academically required by other places. And in that way, actually used a resource that is otherwise completely untouched. I mean, it doesn't make the assumption that because you don't have the grades or the marks or you haven't jumped through the hoops, you don't get in. You know, you're not allowed into the place. And that way, like nothing is wasted in Newfoundland.
Yeah, I mean, we have a funny attitude toward education, formal education in Newfoundland, because even in my younger years, as they used to say, the only people who went to school were the ones that were no good for anything else. Like you were no good for the fishery.
Yeah. Where do you think Fogo Island would be today if it wasn't for Joey Smallwood?
Wow.
You mean if he never became premier at all?
Oh.
The resettlement. Yeah. I mean, in Newfoundland, we like to speculate about what if, Joey had never been born. And when you see the play, and I know you're going to go, you'll see that vote was like super close. And there's a book by Don't Tell the Newfoundlanders.
Oh yeah, Greg.
Oh yes, that's it. Yes, which talks about that. So, given that he was born, and that vote did happen, and if he hadn't tried to resettle us. That is a darn good question. Maybe we are really good in resistance, us Fogo Islanders. It was actually Mary Walsh has this great line of saying, she says, I ricochet between total despair and being hove off on the couch not knowing what to do and being in full out resistance to everything. She says, I haven't figured out how to stop halfway in between some normal place. But I think if we hadn't been faced with the resettlement, maybe the National Film Board would have never come, MUN would have never come, the Fogo process wouldn't have happened, and we might have just kind of disappeared slowly, maybe. Although I don't know, there's a real stickiness with place. But no, I think that is true, because I think what happened after 92 with the moratorium on cod, the other species were coming up, but not fast enough, and there was this. I mean, if there's a crisis, like there's a flood or something, we all go, oh, we have to do something, and we all do something because there's a crisis. It's worse when there's no crisis. It just ekes away. It just disintegrates. So maybe that's, okay, I guess I have to thank Joey for something, is your point.
Don't quote her in Newfoundland. But. Question back there?
Hi. Is this me? Yeah. I think your biography is probably very interesting. I wonder how much, at what point in your career you thought, oh, I think I can retire early, and if so, what would I do at that point? And was it a rather immediate idea of going back to Newfoundland, or was it a long process?
I always thought, in my family, people die young. Like, I'm not supposed to even be here. I mean, I've got brothers that have died younger than me, because we, a long line of people with bad hearts. So I always sort of figured I had to stop working for someone else by the time I was 40 so I could do the things I wanted to do. So that was always and I actually retired at 42. At the time I retired, I had quite a large project in Rwanda. It was a radio education project, solar-powered wind-up radios. And I was doing this project, and I mean, I was going home back and forth. I don't know, at that moment hadn't occurred to me that I should be doing an economic development project at home. And the Rwanda project was at a place where we needed to make a decision about developing content for the radio. And I was starting to get nervous about that, because working in someone else's culture is a really frightening thing. And at that moment, I'd gone sailing. That was so long. So I sailed for 5 years after I retired, and which my father would never have understood, because, as Paul said earlier, he was like, why would you go out there when you don't have to? It's like, that makes no sense. And I was in Mystic, Connecticut, which is America's museum of its relationship with the sea. Now, we have not done a great job in Newfoundland at preserving our maritime heritage at all, but the Americans have, and they had a boat there from Newfoundland, actually. And just that very day, I got a letter from the mayor that my brother was calling to read to me over the phone, saying that an old house that my uncle had left me was falling down. I'm standing in Mystic, Connecticut, which is all of this amazing amount of money being invested in sacred capital, as it should be, to preserve these things. And I thought, first my thought was, well, I'm never going to use that house, I might as well just tear it down. And then I thought, wait a minute, I can afford to fix this house up. And if I'm not going to fix up an old house in Outport, Newfoundland, who do I expect is going to? And so then it became like pulling a thread on a sweater. And so I started with this house, and then I was going home more, and then I could see what was going on with the economy, and I could see, and then I thought, okay, this is enough. I really need to do something. And once you realize that you can do something and should do something, well, then you can't live with yourself if you don't. So that's really it started with a falling down house. Probably if I hadn't been standing in Mystic, Connecticut, when that phone call came, I don't know, maybe I would have found my way home anyway, but...
I'm actually learning a lot about Zita Cobb here tonight, because one thing, I didn't know she was going to study journalism, and then she's involved in radio in Rwanda, and yes. So I'm thinking we have a future together.
Yes, we do. We didn't have electricity, so we didn't have TV and all that, but my brothers who had come to Toronto to work in the factories in Scarborough, I had a brother working in a bubblegum factory, I thought that was pretty cool. They sent my dad one of these radios with the batteries in. He listened to that thing day and night, and he figured out what was going on in the world, and he could tell, like, remember Garner Armstrong used to come on, my dad used to say, now that's a raving lunatic, there's no need to be listening to him. Like, he could tell the difference. And I remember once this opera thing was on, and he said to my mom, the difference between us down here starving to death and them up there going to the opera, whatever that is they've got an education and we don't. From the radio.
Ideas is on at 9:05.
One part of your project is the artist in residence, but the other part is the tourism. And I wondered how you promote that, and where do people come from? How far away is your reach? And is it successful?
The inn we're in the 4th year at the inn. Our business plan was to make money by the 5th year. We made money last year. Not a lot of money, but we're on a good path. How promoting things is really tricky because it's hard. I met Rex Murphy in the very early days of this project. And I know Rex is like, wow. He said, whatever you do, don't have your granny on the corner selling trinkets. And he said, and whatever you do in your, marketing programs, don't instrumentalize the people. And it's very easy, especially in Newfoundland where, everybody's so darn cute. It's like, it's very easy. I see so many of these kinds of programs that make a cartoon of a culture. And I think there's Zygmunt Bauman, there's a fellow, I think 2016 was a terrible year. We lost a lot of really important people. Zygmunt Bauman died in 2000. He wrote many books and he coined the phrase liquid modernity, that in these times we will convert everything and anything, everything sacred, to a liquid form so we can consume it. And I think I give talks about tourism, which we could be here till tomorrow morning, because I think what's gone on in that world is people and communities have been instrumentalized in ways that trivialize cultures. And so we tried not to. We've used architecture, we've used beauty, like some of the things you've seen here. I think that architecture is fair game. It's just a thing, compared to people. And to your question about where people come from, we didn't know really where they were going to come from. In the early years, we've only been at it 4 years, sounds like we've been at it 100. In the first year, probably it was 80% Canadian. And then it started to grow. It's more Americans. Certainly looking into this coming busy season, a lot of Americans. And Germany. I think Germany people have this idea or this dream about Canada as a wild, the people from Germany and Belgium in particular, they want to come into winter. They want to feel the power of a place. Whereas I think in Canada, it's like not many people get up and say, honey, in February, let's go to Newfoundland. But you should.
So we have about 10 minutes, and I think the 3 questions are bargained for. I think a gentleman beside you, Josh.
Hi, I just wanted to say, first of all, how proud we are of you as a Canadian, and I wanted to say how proud somebody I met who spoke incredibly highly of you for a long period of time and also took us for lunch at your place was a lady by the name of Beulah Oak. Oh. And I'm wondering if you could say something about her, because she just raved about you. And I also wondered, do you spend winter there as well? So 2 questions, I guess.
I do. I've been at home, and I have to say it's warmer on Fogo Island than it is in Ottawa, certainly. I live home when I'm not, traveling. Beulah is a pioneer. Beulah and her 7 oaks. So Change Island is our sister island that you mentioned, and we're joined at the ferry. Change Islands used to have a couple of thousand people, and now maybe around 200. It's really suffered a loss of people because they weren't able to keep a fish plant really going. And Beulah Oak, and Beulah and her husband, who's passed away, started a tourism project. She built really a small inn. She calls it a B&B, but it's a small inn, I think it has 10 rooms or something. Beulah must be close to 80 now. Anyway, she single-handedly, with her husband, did this. She created a little industry on Change Islands, which really brought business to the whole northeast coast of Newfoundland. And when we were starting this, of course, Beulah is like stop number 2 after the mayor. And she's been a great advisor. She first thing she said is, now when you're getting ready to make the bids, I'm coming over and showing you people how to make bids, because nobody in the world knows how to make bids. Anyway, Beulah had a small accident this year. She said, the car ran over on me. I said, well, how does the car run over on you? I don't really... Anyway, but she's fine. But she really did hurt her leg. But she's fine. And Beulah has more stamina than all of us. I hope you will see her again this summer. Yes. 7 Oaks, Change Islands.
So early in your talk, you talked a little bit about the people in the outports not knowing each other, and in a certain sense, they were a little bit like foreigners, and it took some doing for people to get to know each other. And I was thinking that when you brought, or when a certain kind of art and design came to Fogo Island, that must have also been a kind of foreigner. And that happens everywhere, I can say, as a contemporary artist. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about how you made some of those bridges, or how those bridges were built between the local people and contemporary artists, and also even contemporary design.
In the first question on Fogo Island people will ask about anything is, what does it have to do with the price of fish? And it certainly is not immediately obvious what contemporary art has to do with the price of fish. And so sometimes you just have to move slowly forward. I would say when we announced the, kind of the whole project in its, with pictures and charts and all of that, by the time we got to that, we'd been probably working on it for a couple of years in conversations. And it was the announcement was an announcement among Shorefast, the federal government, and the Newfoundland government, because the two governments put in 10% each of the original capital, which has since been repaid. I would say it was a storm, very stormy day in February, that we were all gathered for the press conference in the church in Seldom. I would say probably 10% of the people in the room that day thought, this is the worst thing I've ever heard. And, what is contemporary art and all of that? And 10% probably thought, this is the best thing I ever heard. And that 10% is probably, still working, in the foundation. And the other 80% thought some version of, that's never going to happen, we'll see about that, or I don't know, what's it got to do with me? I don't know who, was this a Michael Crummy statement that says Newfoundlanders cheat disappointment by not expecting anything? And, there's been a lot of disappointment in Outport, Newfoundland, like a lot of promises of projects that either don't start at all or start and fail or whatever. And so that was in 2009. I would say since 2009, that 80% has moved to kind of go, okay, I kind of get this. Because when you think about it, just in sheer employment, 1/3 of the households on Fogo Island have somebody working in these projects somehow. And just with the construction, building the first studio, and the carpenters, bringing mom down on the weekends to show her what they're doing. So it's a question of going at the right speed. For sure, it's, you will find people who will say about, say, the Long Studio, what is that doing here? It looks like it came from outer space. And somebody would say, well, sure, he didn't invent anything, he just copied what we had. Yeah, so I think that's that tension. And I think it is hard for some people more than others to accept that. Why would an artist come and work on Fogo Island from France? We've got artists here. But I think now people are starting to kind of understand that when that artist leaves, that's an ambassador for place. And it's a part of, we have to do the hard work to hold on. And we have to do the hard work to reach out. And art is a very powerful way to reach out, and so is design. Not everybody loves everything, though.
Hi. I'm a student both in SASA, and I'm also planning on going into business in my 3rd year. And I'm interested in this idea that you have about meaning, about what you do should have meaning. And I think often in the arts, it can seem a lot more obvious when we talk about meaning in this kind of ambiguous way, but that there is some kind of meaning. But you also talked about how you're a capitalist and you don't think that capitalism is a bad thing. And I would agree. But I wonder how you derive meaning from the business world and from capitalism, from being in a business that's looking mostly for profits, and how you drive the meaning out of that compared to the projects that you get to do now, which are more involved with the arts.
I have been involved in starting a few businesses in my life. I've never been involved in starting a business to make money. I've always been involved in starting businesses to solve problems. Like the ones on Fogo Island, to solve the problem of employment. And I think one of the most important things for us human beings to make meaning is to be able to develop some kind of competence. I think that's deeply tied to identity. And so I think business as a tool that helps create an opportunity or create a situation where someone can do what they're good at, whether they're someone from engineering physics who worked on wave division multiplexing. I used to be the finance person, and nothing gave me greater joy than these physicists and engineers who were doing, what they're so good at. Same thing on Fogo Island when I go up to the furniture shop. I think that business is an enabler in a very practical way. And I think if looking at the humanities, it's an and, it's not an or. And they belong together. I'm a big fan of, it's E.O. Wilson, right? I always mix up the Wilsons. He has this book called Consilience, which I think he made the word up. I think it means the unity of knowledge. Like, business is going to help us build, if we use it right, a foundation for people to build their lives around. It's very hard to make meaning when you feel like you're on a slippery ball all the time. Maslow's pyramid and all that. I tell you what, if you do humanities, I'll take care of the first few rings, rounds on it. I'll get the shelter and food, and you can help people self-actualize. But it's all a part of it. You could study business, you'll still be a good person.
So I think we're at time. We'll hold applause for 1 second. I was just going to invite Josh Lambier, the Director of the Public Humanities, down for a quick announcement.
It's interesting when Joel said that this is the 5th year that we've been doing the series. It dawned on me that this is the 5th year that we've been doing the series. And there are so many people that make this possible. I did want to acknowledge them. First of all, I wanted to acknowledge what a enriching presence Paul Kennedy has been at Western this year, and how many things that he's catalyzed, including this talk. So thank you very much, Paul, for your efforts to make this possible. I also wanted, Joel Burton has been hot on the trail of Zita Cobb for quite some time to bring her here, and it was him who brought us to the attention of the work that you just heard about, and a huge gratitude to Joel. I also wanted to recognize, yes, it's people in our community who do mention these events that we can bring to attention, that we can try and bring events like this. But we wouldn't be able to do it without Matt and Anita from the museum who put this together, Joel Faflack at SASA who puts this together. These are projects that we put together because a phrase that Joel used that's absolutely fundamental here is the public good. We put a lot of work in, and this is a side of desk to many people, and in addition to all the responsibilities that they have in their roles, to bring events like this, and thank you for all your patience when we were getting everybody in, to bring events like this to you in the London community to enrich the public and social life of this city. That's why we do Public Matters, that's why it's accessible, and that's why it's here. And if you didn't come to animate these events and to come and listen intently and maybe activate some of these ideas in our community, this event wouldn't be possible. So thank you for coming to this event. If you did have a question and you wanted to ask Zita, tomorrow we have a session that the SASA students, as well as the public, is welcome to come to. It's going to be here at the museum at 1 p.m. We're going to be upstairs in the community gallery. You're all welcome to come and join us. And you can, that burning question that you wanted to ask, you have a second shot to ask that question. So we do hope you join us. To conclude, I wanted to thank Zita for such an overwhelming talk. The idea of creating global networks with an intense locality to them is just such a powerful idea. Thank you very much for joining us in London. We look forward to tomorrow. It was a stunning opening night for us. Thank you very much.